Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of The Closing Pitch. In this episode, we have Matt Borgschulte. He is the most recent hire for the Minnesota Twins, and this is a special conversation for me because our paths have crossed many times through youth, high school, and college baseball. So being able to sit down for an hour and a half long podcast to be able to discuss the game and how he thinks about it was very refreshing, and a lot of the things that I thought were true and a lot of things that I thought were also false. So there's a lot of good insights that Matt provides at the major league level as well as the minor league level. Another interesting thing about Matt is that he's ascended to the major league ranks super fast, and his ability to stay at the major league level is really impressive. So this is a conversation you do not want to skip, especially if you are a player who's aspiring to play at the major league level or if you are aspiring to coach at the major league level. He gives you a lot of good insights that you can apply to your own life. So I appreciate you guys listening to this conversation. Please subscribe to the channel. That's the only way that we grow, and that'd be the biggest compliment if you could do that. So I appreciate you, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Matt Borgschulte.
Okay.
So it's like war games?
Huh?
It's like war games?
No, like simulated. It's like a video game, but it's like our lineup and
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like war games. Like, you know, like war games, like in the military, they'll play like these simulations.
Oh, okay.
And so they call it. There's an actual movie called War Games.
Okay. Yeah,
And
that
they-
sounds like that then.
Yeah, like it's actually really good. It's a movie where it's nuclear war. Like they play out the scenario, and then they're trying to figure it out, but it's actually happening. And so they don't know if it's like happening or not happening, and because they're in this bunker, because they're DEFCON, whatever. But like that, it doesn't sound like you guys are dealing with nuclear war. But anyways, that does sound interesting. So like they do like simulations on.
Yeah. It just gives a better idea for everyone involved, just on, how we're going to use the bullpen, what situations to make sure pinch hitters are ready, what are the best matchups, make sure we have the platoon advantage and all of that. And it's beneficial to kind of get a glimpse into, for everyone to get a glimpse into what is going through the managers, the bench coach, and everyone, pitching coaches in mind.
Yeah.
And so that way we can all be on the same page, because things happen so fast. You think like watching a game that, you have innings and innings to think, and you do, but especially now with the pitch clock, things happen so fast.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. Even in the playoffs, it happens like even faster. Things just go by so fast when all the situations, all the different scenarios, and then you have the manager on the other side trying to do the same thing, and so it can be challenging. But it's made it a little bit easier for him now with the 3 pitcher or the 3 batter minimum, and all of that. So you can't really get too deep into the scenarios of using so many pitchers, but it's
So like how in depth do these simulations go? Do you like go like, okay, this is like week 20 or whatever? Like, do you guys like go deep into like the season of like, oh, this is how it could possibly play out? Or
we would basically get a scenario of, here's a random day throughout the season that we're playing this team.
Okay.
And
they're throwing whoever.
Here's their starter, or like one of them we're doing like a bullpen game, because a lot of teams do that, and that's one of the most challenging to navigate, right? Yeah. So, that's kind of how it starts out with, is just to figure out who's starting, who we would put in that starting lineup to face that type of guy, knowing who's probably going to come in after that, and how we can best create the best platoon advantage. But then it's like some teams do a really good job of starting a certain pitcher, saying like, oh, this is the bulk guy, because usually it's kind of I don't know, it's just kind of the way it goes, where you say like who the bulk guy is. This is the opener, and then eventually we're going to use this guy who's like your 3 or 4 inning type guy. They don't always go right to that guy.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have a lefty starter, so we put, you start all the righties, and then you bring in a righty, well then now they take in. Now, if you take out all the righties and put in lefties, then when the lefty comes back in, then that lefty has the platoon advantage for all of them. You can't make two switches, you know what I mean? Or vice versa. If it's a righty that starts and then you bring in all the lefties, or if it's a lefty that starts and you have all righties or whatever the case is, now the righty bullpen arms at the back end have the platoon advantage for the rest of the game against your right-handed hitters. So it's challenging the way they do it, but it's smart, and a couple teams do a really good job.
It seems like it just keeps everyone off balance because like San Francisco did with one of our alumni. So Eric Miller was the opener for San Francisco, and whenever they faced LA, obviously he was come in during when he pitched against Ohtani, but I remember distinctly like Boston, he would go out and open that inning.
Yep.
And it made a lot of sense to me why they would do that, because as an offense, you can't feel comfortable with seeing the same guy twice, and so you end up struggling.
Well, there's many different ways to do it. Some teams do it to get the starter not facing the top of the order for the third time till later in the game. So they have their more leveraged bullpen arm face the most difficult part of the lineup, and then bring the starter in. So then the next time around, they're when they get to the sixth inning or whatever it is, then they're not facing those guys as much as you're having more of your leverage bullpen guys are. But yeah, it's all dependent, and you could have the best plan of all time, but it just depends on execution.
What's so fascinating is like the offense, like not the offense, but the pitching bullpens and the specialization of pitching has gotten so good. Yeah. That it makes you wonder, like, what is this thing going to look like in like 5 years?
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the average fastball velocity has gone up every year. I mean, I think it's like at 94.5 right now. It was like 95.5 in the playoffs. And, not just the velocity. It's like there's nobody that throws a straight fastball.
Well,
everyone's moving, and they're doing such a good job of, with the slow motion camera, saying, okay, if I move my fingers from here to here, now I'll make the spin change, which makes the ball move more. And so it's just they're making it really challenging on us. So we have a tough job to do to try to combat all of that.
So this conversation came about because I was talking with Jason Bell, who's a mutual friend of ours.
Yep.
And I was asking him, I was like, man, I really want to get some more pro guys on. And he's like, well, what about Matt? And I was like, oh shoot, he's from St. Louis. I was wondering if he like still lives here. So I ended up shooting you a text, and luckily you're here. And I wanted to bring you on because you have an interesting story, how you started, how you got to Major League Baseball. And it was a pretty fast track overall. Because I remember walking through the ABCA, and you were actually working for Game Sense at the time, right?
Yeah.
And that was pre-COVID. That was like 2018, 2017.
Yeah.
So like talk about your path, because it's very unique. You played at Western Kentucky.
Yep.
And then you went to Drury.
Yep.
Had a pretty phenomenal last final year.
Yep.
And then you end up coaching at SEMO with Beezer, right?
That's right.
So you end up getting to the pro track pretty fast because Beezer's a former pro guy.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a combination of everything. I got really lucky, and I've been really lucky throughout my coaching career to just be able to get around people that are really smart and have challenged me and helped me in a lot of different ways. And Beezer certainly one of them. And that staff, when I first started, basically my first coaching job, because I stayed on. I had some transfer credits that didn't go through, so I stayed on at Drury for an extra semester and started coaching there, and just kind of fell in love with it. And took the job at SEMO, and at SEMO we had Dylan Lawson was the hitting coach, who ended up being the Yankees Major League hitting coach for a couple of years. Now he's the assistant hitting coach for the Boston Red Sox in the Major Leagues. So pretty cool to get to have someone like that to learn from your first job. And then the pitching coach was Lance Rhodes, who's at SAO Carbondale now, and then Beezer, and then obviously we had a couple great years, and then Beezer took over at Missouri, and then brought Dylan as a hitting coach, and kind of the new coach that came in at SEMO brought his own guy, so I kind of got lost in the mix a little bit. So I went to stayed in St. Louis with Rick Strickland, worked there for a little bit, and then worked for Game Sense. And while I was doing that, I had like an alumni golf tournament with Drury, and a guy named Ricky Meinhold was a scout for the Cardinals at the time that I got paired up with. And, we were chatting, and he said, hey, we got this, entry-level position for the Cardinals. It's called a fourth coach. And what you do is, you're like a half coach and a half scout. And then, after that year, you either go into coaching or you're going to scouting. He said, we have, all kinds of people try it out. At that point, I hadn't really thought as professional as even an option, but, I figured I'd give it a shot, and went through the interview process, and it was all really good. And then came down to me and another guy. They decided to go with the other guy, and so I was a little disappointed about that. But then a couple weeks later, I get a call. Hey, this guy backed out. Do you want to? You want to take the job? I'm like, yeah, man, well, no, I got to be there, So fly down to Florida, start spring training. I was a little bit late to spring, so missed a couple things, but tried to get caught up. And it's a really, really challenging job, scouting is, especially scouting professional players where, you're watching every single guy on the field. It's a tough thing because you never know what adjustment a guy's going to be able to make, because they all have talent. They all were good enough to be drafted. So, but anyways, it's kind of crazy how I kind of backed into that role, and then from there I found it. I got in touch with some other coaches and some other front office members as I finished that year. It's kind of like a 1-year position. Got in touch with a guy named Jeremy Zoll, who was, at the time, he was with Gabe Kapler with the Dodgers in the minor leagues. Okay. And then he took the job as the director of player development for the Twins, and kept my information. So we got in touch, and I got a job as a hitting coach for the rookie ball team at GCL at the time. I think they call it the FCL now, but that's kind of how I got started with the Twins. Kind of worked my way up the next year in High A, and then in Triple A for a couple years, and then the Orioles called, and had a couple mutual connections there, and got the job in the major leagues for the first time in 2022. I had a couple awesome years, and just a lot of fun with a lot of great young players, and then having that connection with Jeremy Zoll, who's now the general manager of the Twins, and then Alex Hassan and a couple other, a bunch of other people within the organization from my time there. I think it was 5 years there, so got to know a ton of people. Great organization, and I can't wait to get things going in spring training.
What's odd about St. Louis is that there's so many guys that are in professional sports. Like it's it's a hotbed, and especially in our generation, because you're low 30s.
Yep, 34.
So I'm 35. So like our generation, you have Jason, you have you, Cody Ashe. Yep. We just talked about him off camera.
Well, just on the staff with the Orioles, we also had Mitch Plasmeyer. Who,
absolutely.
It's kind of crazy, just three St. Louis guys on the same staff with Baltimore. But it's.
What do you think it is about the area that ends up producing these coaches and instructors? Because there's a lot of us.
Yeah, I think it's just a love for the game, and just the environment that we grew up with in St. Louis during our childhood was such an amazing time for baseball. And, I think that's a huge part of it.
I guess it's all the facilities that were built
for sure
during the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, well, and then the Cardinals having so much success, and so. It was a great time for baseball too. So just in general,
what separates a minor league hitting coach from a major league hitting coach? Like from your perspective on like a skill set and knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that go into it, in my opinion. I think the way you relate to the player is extremely important, and you've probably heard the adage a million times, like they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's important. I think that's true. But for the major league coach, you also have to get them better. You also have to prove that what you're saying actually has some substance. So,
but how do you get a major league player better? I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Because they're so talented.
Yeah.
And like I can go out here in the facility and look at like a 5-year-old swing, same with yours, and you're like, oh, this is what's going on, right? Or even like a high school kid. But then like with Major League, it's a different beast altogether.
Yep.
So like, how do you know what to change or how to convince them to change because they're so good at what they do?
Well, I mean, every player is different. So for me, you have to kind of get to know exactly what they think about, what makes them tick, and then try to kind of coordinate my efforts towards what aspect of their game needs work. Mm-hmm. But that's the thing about hitting is that it's so challenging and there's so many areas that you can struggle with. So I think the first thing you kind of do is think, like, where are the areas for improvement? Like, what does he struggle with? Yeah. If I'm a pitching coach or if I'm a advanced scout and I'm watching and I'm looking at his numbers, like where are we going to attack him? Mm-hmm. And hopefully that is a glaring hole. And most of the time, if they stayed into the major leagues for any period of time, it's not a glaring hole. It's just somewhat of a weakness. And so we try to combine, like, how can we make their weaknesses a little bit better while maintaining, or if not, improving their strengths. Mm-hmm. And like I said, every player is different. Some of them trying to improve that weakness might hinder their strength. So instead of that, that's like, okay, let's hammer that strength and make sure that's something that if they make a mistake, every time we're ready for it. Because if you start missing mistakes in the major leagues, now you're really in trouble.
So like the mistakes that you're looking at, are they more of like swing and misses on certain pitches or certain locations, or is it like mechanical? What like?
Yeah, well, I think it's all going to be combined in my mind that I've found of like there's certain things that happen in the swing that cause you not to be able to hit off speed very well, or struggles with four seams. Well, okay, he struggles with four seams up in the zone, a lot of swing and miss. Generally, like, what is the main thing that happens when you swing and miss at four seams? Like, your bat path does not match the plane of the pitch, right? So generally, the four seamer is coming in more flat. Your bat path is missing underneath. So we have to find a way to get that bat path a little bit flatter. Now, he probably has success on shapes moving down because that matches his bat path better. So we want to make sure that that's still a strength while attacking that four-seam weakness. And, Gunnar Henderson was actually a really good example of that. It just has like a naturally lofty left-handed swing, but struggled with four-seam fastballs when he first got up to the major leagues. And that's kind of one of the things that's happening right now in the minors, especially at the upper levels, is just it's not producing the same challenge that the major league does. So guys could have a ton of success in AAA, and then when they get to the major leagues, they're facing a totally different, because there's no next level. The major leagues is the top. You're not going anywhere further.
Have you noticed like the pitching is just a little bit different from AAA to
big time.
Big time. Like if we could make an analogy of like how big of a difference is, and like we're traveling to, let's just say Mars, where would AAA be from pitching to Major League Baseball?
I mean, I don't know if I could put a specific number on it, but I've got a lot of exposure to it over the past couple years, especially with some of our top prospects with the Orioles playing very, very well in the minor leagues and dominating, and then coming up to the major leagues. And there's so many other factors too, right? In the minor leagues, there's not as much pressure. There's not, you're not on national TV every day. There's not 40,000 people. There's a lot of different factors other than just the talent that's on the field.
Well, even the pedestal of like being in the Coliseum, like actually stepping foot in front of all these people, like
no question.
Because in your mind, you're thinking about this your whole life, and then you actually get there, and you're like, the pressure of that.
Yeah. Well, not only that, it's like they have like a time sensitive window where they're trying to provide, for their family for the rest of their life, and that makes every single at bat and every single chance that you have to prove yourself extremely important. And so, the biggest thing is just trying to keep them in the present moment, not thinking about the future, not thinking about they were 0 for 4, am I going to get sent down, or I'm 4 for 4, or I'm 2 for 3, whatever the case is. It's like, let's try to be in the present moment of what's actually happening in this at bat, so you can execute the best that you possibly can. And so, but yeah, there's a big difference, and I feel like it's getting a little bit bigger as more teams have kind of pushed their younger prospects, up to the higher levels a little bit quicker than they have in the past. There's less of the veteran minor leaguers around that are able to play in the major leagues, but just might not be the first guy. It might be like the second string guy. So if somebody falls down or gets hurt, they're ready. I don't think there's as many of those guys right now in AAA. So overall, that's kind of falling down. And then all the injuries with the pitchers in the major leagues, if there's a good pitcher in the minor leagues, they're coming up to help the major league team.
So there's a gap.
Yeah, there's a gap for sure. I mean, there's always a gap.
Yeah.
There's always a gap. And I think, like I said, with guys being pushed a little bit quicker, there's even more of a gap now.
So if you could look back at, because you obviously played college, but if you look at college player, a rookie ball player, AA, AAA, Major League, how does this guy get to here as a hitter and preparing for this moment here?
College player?
Yeah. What does he need to know and learn?
I think the biggest thing for a hitter in general is to understand that there's always adjustments that need to be made. There's never a finished product. You're never done until your career is over. If you're not making the adjustment to what the pitching is doing, then you're going to start getting worse. And that goes from everybody. Because
so that means even Juan Soto has to adjust.
Yeah, always. He's always trying to figure out what the pitcher is trying to do to him. The pitching is just so good now that you can't if all you're doing is sitting fastball and adjusting, and you're not anticipating what the situation might call for, what the pitching, what the pitching department with that team has a bias towards, what the catcher, because the catcher's the one that's calling it, what the catcher has a bias towards calling, what the pitcher is shaking off to, and what he threw you last at bat, what you hit well, what you struggled with, and all those different things. I'm sure he does a great job. I don't know Soto personally, but we have a lot of players that I've had with the Orioles and even guys with the Twins that you study. This is something that you study all day to make sure that you're prepared. And some players can sit fastball and adjust and have success. Now there's some pitchers that you're going to be able to get away with that. There's less and less now because everyone seems to be really, really good. But when you're facing the top line guy, it's you have to give something up in order to have success. So whether that's, I know I can't cover up on this guy, let's do this, or we need to see him up, because even though he has some chase above the zone with his fastball, he does most of his damage by getting you to chase in the dirt. So if we can move him up, then we have a better chance, or not let him. Just give them the outside corner or the outer half or the outer third or whatever it is. But I think the biggest thing for players as they're going throughout their careers, knowing that there's always adjustments that need to be made, and they always have to continue to get better. And that doesn't matter if you're at the top of your game or not. There's always, until you get to the major leagues, there's always another level that you have to reach in your game. And, there's a certain extent where there's, we have to keep them from tinkering too much where, they're just trying to change. We have to have a reason to and a goal of what we're trying to achieve with that as well.
So when you say study, are they looking at notes? Are they looking at video? What does a typical major league player do? And the other follow-up question to that is, are they playing probabilities, or are they playing just based on gut instinct? How do they approach it?
It's a little bit of both. There's a little bit of both, and everybody does it a little bit differently. Some guys like to go just by the numbers and say he throws 75% slider and 2-strike counts or something. So I'm probably going to get a slider, right? Why would I sit on fastball when the most used pitch is a slider? And now, overall, last year, I think it was 51.7% of pitches were non-fastballs. So more than half of the time, anyways, you're not getting a fastball.
Jeez.
So and it's faster than ever.
So your old fastball approach does not work in this scenario.
Well, there's so many ways to do it, and I don't think that every hitter needs to sit on pitches, but when you start to see that you're getting more off speed than fastball, if all you're looking for is fastball and you're getting off speed, there's an adjustment that needs to be made for sure, right? But yeah, it's a combination of the numbers, looking at what that pitcher throws most often.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they look internally of, okay, what do I get most often?
Mm-hmm.
Like what do pitchers try to get me out? The last 2 weeks, what have I done that they're going to look at? Because I know that they're going to study me, you know? And what is that going to tell them about how they need to pitch me today or tonight or this series? And it might say, I've struggled with fastballs. Okay, maybe I'll get fastballs, you know, and then you look at the pitcher and you see, okay, he throws 60% fastballs overall. Early in the count, he throws closer to 70 or whatever the case is. But then when you're in that, you take that information to your at-bat, right? And that's in your mind. But then within the moment, you have to understand the situation because every situation is different, right? So if you're the third hitter up, let's say, okay, this pitcher throws, it's a relief pitcher, he throws 70% first pitch slider, for instance, right? Yeah. If he's already faced two hitters and they've both seen sliders first pitch, the likelihood that the third hitter is also going to see a first pitch slider is just not as high, right? So while that's the
plus when you have runners in scoring position,
yeah,
that changes everything.
Changes. Yeah, everything changes. So that's kind of the intuition or the gut instinct part of it. Or, you know, we look at all kinds of different things of like what the next pitch is after this or after that or whatever the case is. And one of the big ones is like, okay, this guy throws 2 strikes, he throws 80% four-seamers, right? Like let's say he mixes a lot early, but then to get you out, he goes for the strikeout, he tries to go four seams up, right? Well, if it's 1-1 and you take a four seam and you yank it foul to the pull side, the likelihood he's going to try to come back with a fastball is just not as high because he knows you're on time for that. So the catcher's like, okay, he's ready for that fastball. Like, let me switch it up a little bit, right? Then there's another level when these guys, the catcher and the hitter are both veterans and the pitcher are both veterans.
Plus you have...
Now there's another level, right, where the catcher's like, okay, he just pulled a fastball foul. I know he thinks we're not going to throw another fastball, right, because he knows that, oh, I'm on time for that. He's not going to throw me that again. I'm going to sit on off speed. Yeah. Well, the catcher's like, I know he's going to sit off speed, so I'm going to throw fastball again. Yeah. Right? There's all those kind of levels, and you can kind of like start going down a rabbit hole a little bit too much sometimes, but that's just the kind of depth that happens in those situations that, you know, not many people see. They just see well, you don't see the fingers anymore. It's the pitch com, but
how much does the data from like the data department really play a factor in game decisions, especially when you're dealing with pitch com now?
Big time, for sure. A lot of catchers now have like little arm bands where they have different information. I don't know what all teams put on there, but most of the time it's some type of scouting report where it shows, okay, less than 2 strikes, this is the area to go, or this is the pitch type to go. With 2 strikes, this is where you should go. And based on each pitcher, it'll have like every pitcher on the card and what they like to throw and what's the best pitch, whether that's analytically, whether that's like using a forecasting type model or whether it's using the past where like what's actually happened versus what they predict would happen.
No way. This is unreal. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this whole thing because like, I mean, obviously we played at the same time in college and we had our scouting report was a basic like written note like, hey, this guy has a slider, a fastball, and sometimes he has a cutter that kind of acts like a slider but it's more of a cutter. And you're like, okay, got it. All right.
Yep.
Let's go up there.
The scouting report just watches warm-up pitches, right? Because whatever he throws in the warm-ups, that's what he's probably going to throw, right? Yeah, so 100%. You got to be paying attention to that. And guys still do. And it's funny because in spring training, a lot of times, just with the way things are, you don't want pitchers to throw too many pitches. You know, they're on a pitch count. They're ramping up. So you'll face a lot of minor league pitchers that we didn't know that we're even going to face, right? We're not going to prepare for the entire spring training roster.
Yeah, exactly.
So there'll be, you know, players that we don't know, and the hitters will come over and like, hey, what does he got? I was like, I have no idea. I don't even know this guy's name. You know, watch the warm-up pitches, right? So this is
so
like,
go back to old
this
school.
is old school, you know? It's like you don't get information like you do in every other situation. And some players are like, wait, what? I've never had to do, I don't know how to do that, you know, because they've had that kind of thing their whole career. But yeah, it's funny. And you have to go back to the old school to watch the warm ups. Oh, he's got a slider.
So what's your typical day look like?
Usually during the season, let's say at home, I'll get to the field. Usually get a workout in, and then after that, start doing some prep for that night, going over the starter. If it's the first game of the series, I'm going over the bullpen guys, just studying kind of tendencies, what they have, going through our game plan against those pitchers, and then guys start coming into the cage, doing their like early prep routines, and then we'll have like a hitters meeting where we'll go over the plan for the start of that day. Usually we'll go over a bullpen guy, hopefully a guy that we're going to face that day. If it's the closer's gone back-to-back days, he might not be available that night. We'll go over the setup guy or whatever the case is. So that's kind of how the meeting would go, and then after the meeting, usually batting practice, and then guys come in from batting practice on the field. Kind of a little bit of a lull where they're eating and resting a little bit, and then right before the game, probably like 30, 45 minutes, some guys will come back in and face something a little bit more challenging, whether that's like a nasty machine or throwing mixed BP to kind of get them ready, take them through at bats and things like that. So then the game, and then basically after the game, you're heading out, getting ready for the next one.
What are you doing during the games?
I like to, I'm in the dugout watching the game, obviously, paying attention. I like to chart the game just in terms of the pitches.
So to keep you engaged?
Helps me stay engaged. And then, if they have iPads in the dugout where you can they have video, you can go through, you can watch the side angle, the front angle, whatever. But for the couple times a game where a hitter wants to know what the sequence was for the previous hitter, like I don't have to go over to the iPad and pull it up, what I have it, or I just know because I'm watching. And so if I'm not writing that down, I can like kind of, lose track a little bit. Yeah.
So if you see something that you've noticed, like let's just say Correa has an at-bat and you notice something that's going on in that at-bat, you'll actually go to that iPad, pull up the at-bat itself, get the clips, and then go to Correa when he comes back in and say, hey, here's what's going on. This is what I'm seeing. And then he takes that information and runs with it. Is that how it plays out?
Potentially. Try to stay away as much as possible from doing too much in terms of like mechanics during the game. Some guys like that. Some guys like it and don't need it and shouldn't have it because it just, you can't have too many things going on when you're trying to hit.
But I'm talking more like strategy.
The type of pitching. But yeah, for sure, the strategy of looking, it's actually important for guys to kind of check those things because you can see like, oh, he busted me in, twice in a row.
Yeah.
That at bat. Well, then you look back at the iPad and like he was actually set up away on the second one, but he missed the spot and hit it in. So then you don't get confused thinking like,
he's trying to do that,
trying to bust me in. No, it was just a miss.
That was like a huge unlock for me when I was playing. Was like, I don't know what got into me, but I was like, maybe this is like YouTube was just getting ramped up, and then colleges were starting to put their videos online. And I don't know what caused me. I guess I was just bored in my apartment. And I was like, who do we play the first game? Okay, we're going down to Texas Tech. Let me look up Texas Tech. And I looked up all the pitchers, and I found like videos of them. And then I started realizing like where they were pitching, what they were doing. And then I go into our video room, and I was like, I wonder if we have videos of myself hitting. We ended up having it back in 2011, and then it was like a whole unlock. I was like, I was sitting away this whole time, but everyone was throwing me in, and I had no idea. It was like a huge unlock. So I had this like first 2 weeks where I was just unloading on pitches, and then I didn't realize like, scouting reports, they're going to end up changing everything altogether. Yep. So it makes it fascinating that like high school players now and college players have more access to information that can kind of do a dumbed down version of what you guys are doing
for sure,
and figuring out, this is what this guy's doing.
Yeah, and that's it. That was exactly what I meant earlier about like there's always an adjustment. So you made the adjustment to start attacking the inside pitch. Well, the pitchers are gonna I can't do that anymore. Like let me do this, right? Yeah. So then now you have to make the adjustment of Now I can sit back out over the plate and drive the ball the other way up the middle, whatever the case is.
Because you have a target on your back if you're batting like 400.
Exactly.
With like a couple
they're always
jacks.
going to figure out. Yeah, they're always going to figure out, what they need to do. And sometimes they can't execute it as well, which I think is something that happens in the minor leagues where you might have a hole. You might have a glaring hole, but the pitchers in the minor leagues might not be able to consistently
hit that.
execute that. Yeah. Or, they execute it once and then let's say you chase sliders down. Well, they throw you a good chase slider that starts right at the bottom, like goes right out the bottom of the zone, and you swing and miss at it. Well, they're like, oh yeah, let me do that again. Well, they bounce this on the plate. Okay, so you didn't swing at the one that bounces on the plate. So they do that 3 more times, and now it's 3-2. And then they try
totally
to go a
different.
fastball on it, and they walk you, right?
Yeah.
Well, if it was in the major leagues and they just throw 3 of those same ones, right, and
that
you're
location.
out.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to lay off of those, but you'll lay off the one that hits the plate.
So it's almost like you have to recommend to the players, like, figure out the locations that you really struggle at and just pound those locations and try to figure out how can I hit that location. Is that kind of the recommendation for like younger hitters?
I hate to narrow it down so much to locations because the shapes make a big difference too.
Talk about shapes, because I don't think a lot of people would know what that means by shapes.
Yeah, so just like 4-seam fastballs, straighter, like shapes more going like this, then like a 2-seam one that runs like maybe like some sink, sliders, and then like a bigger depthy curveballs. And when you are at the lower levels and those pitches are coming in a little bit slower speeds, it doesn't make as big of a difference. But when you're thinking about the goal is to match up the path that the bat is going through the zone with the pitch that's coming in, right? The difference in a 4-seam coming like this and a curveball coming like that is big. So your timing window, if your swing is really, really flat and straight, you're going to be able to hit that 4-seam because it matches that perfectly. But if a pitch is coming in a little bit steeper, now like your timing window is a lot smaller, right? So you have to kind of have that dynamic swing where you have the ability to, it's upstairs, like I can match that plane. Oh, it's this, like I have to like work under it a little bit, right? And
it's that barrel control.
Yeah, and all of those shapes just kind of get magnified as you go up. So the sinkers that like sink a little bit, once you get to the minor leagues, they sink even more. And the major leagues, like they sink even more and probably have more run. And
they're probably breaking later.
Yeah, for sure, coming in faster.
Yeah,
and then they also have
like
a slider. Yeah. Well, the other factor now that's come into play over the past several years is kind of the arm angle. I mean, it's something that's kind of people have known about forever and used forever, but it's starting to make more sense now as teams start to understand. Like let's say Clay Holmes is a great example of a guy who throws a sinker, but he throws it from like a higher slot. So because he's releasing it higher, it has like more of a down angle than if you were, which normally guys that throw sinkers throw them from further out, right? So because his is more over the top, it's going to come in at a little bit steeper plane. So we're kind of measuring like what the angle is that pitch is coming in at to know, okay, how steep is that pitch? Like how much do I have to really get under that? Or vice versa. Like most of the time, guys that throw 4-seamers throw from straight over the top. So when you have a guy that throws from a slot down here but throws a 4-seamer that comes up, that's going to come in really, really flat. So
Well, and also hitters can recognize just like that one little adjustment from down to up on certain pitches. Like we naturally, I think, as humans, we kind of perceive that, and then now it's coming to the forefront of like, oh, your arm angle was like 17 degrees or whatever the case may be, just throwing out numbers. But then like you're at 16 degrees when you throw this pitch, and that's why guys are hammering it.
Yep.
It makes a lot more sense with like arm angles and everything like that.
For sure.
So do like scouts now look for pitchers that are in that category of like certain arm angles because of the shapes that they're able to create with the pitch?
I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think it's used to help understand why. So we have these movement plots where it's like a graph that shows, it has this much vertical break and this much horizontal break, and that boom, it plots right there on the plot. Well, there's teams have done a lot of research into, okay, a pitch that moves like this and like this, like what is the normal, how does that perform, right? And where should they try to throw it? What movement should we try to throw it with to produce the most success, right?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes all the movement isn't created equal sometimes, right? Because of the arm angle, the ball's going to come in at a little bit different spot. So you might have on there, it says 12 inches or 15 inches of vertical break, which is like basically like a normal fastball. Like it won't feel like it has a ton of like ride or hop to it. But because he's throwing down here, it's going to come in much flatter. So it'll feel like it has
That oomph.
that hop, even though it doesn't show that on the movement plot. So that will help the scouts, help the analytic department to say like, oh, like he's not producing that much vertical movement on his pitch, but because of his arm slot, the ball is actually playing up a little bit more. So you might say like, oh, well, I can't expect this guy to have a lot of miss on his four seam because it's only 15 inches of vertical break. Well, actually, because of the slot that he's throwing from, it might allow him to have more success with that.
Even if it appears that way.
Yeah.
Like, that whole thing where like that guy throws a heavy ball. What does that mean in data terms? Like, do you know what that like? Is there a correlation to that? Is there truth to that? Me personally, I always thought it was BS. I was like, heavy ball. What do you mean? Like it's just a baseball coming out of the plate. Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if there's something specific.
Yeah.
I think it just is a way to describe the movement before we kind of understood a little bit more about it. And honestly, I think you could have a heavy ball as both. Like a heavy ball is like a heavy, nasty sinker, but then also like
it can
a
rise
ball
up.
that has a lot of ride and like and gets on you when you're trying to catch it could be heavy too. So I'm not really sure. I think it's just a way to describe something that's a little bit different than what you're used to. And I've seen it. I've seen it before.
Yeah.
And like, wow, this guy's ball is really heavy. Like either heavy because it sinks or heavy because like when you hit it, it doesn't respond the way that you're used to,
It could just be like how the English language is, and we don't really know how to describe it yet. And then as we start getting computers, we start getting more sophisticated. Like, oh, it's just because it moves.
Yeah, for sure.
Talk like what I know. I'm going to switch gears rapidly here. What did you study in college, and how did it like? Were you even thinking about becoming a Major League Baseball coach, or was it just like the stars kind of aligned to it?
Yeah, it was sports management and business, and then I got a master's in sports management business as well. But I think I knew I wanted to do something in sports.
Yeah.
At the time when I was studying, I didn't think about coaching at all. Specifically, I just knew I loved the game of baseball and I loved sports, and I knew that there would hopefully be some way for me to make that happen continuing forward. I thought I was going to play forever. At that point, I'm sure everybody does. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. It was exercise and sports science at Drury, and then the special program of sports management. So that actually has helped me out a lot.
Yeah. So like
just from that foundational knowledge of the body and how the body works, and some of the not as in depth as like kinesiology or anything like that, but just understanding some of those main principles of what the body needs to do and how it can perform and the limitations that it has, and all those things are really important to kind of understanding the type of movements that need to take place, for studying what the best hitters do, and how they produce the movement too. So that's helped me out a ton, I feel like.
So you just thought, I just want to stay in the game, and whatever that materializes as, then that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of guys, one of my biggest bugaboos is like when we're talking to high school guys, they're not like talking about what are you interested in, and then they get into college and then they waste like 2 years of their life, and then they waste the scholarship money that they've gotten, and then next thing you know, they're in debt going out of college. Like, luckily the NIL is going to fix a lot of those things, but
and still don't know what they're going to do.
And still don't know what they're going to do.
Which is common.
And it's common. It's just like, I wish we would that's why I think this podcast is so important, is like it's giving another way of thinking about it and trying to push them in a direction of like, okay, what's your interest? Is it baseball? Great. If it's baseball, then there's so many different avenues. And if it's sports, you're open to so many different things. You can get into the NFL, you can get into the NHL, you can get into independent baseball. There's a lot of things that you could do, right? It's just I feel like they're underprepared, and then they end up getting to college, and then they have a counselor that says, "Oh, you should do criminology." Well, why should I do criminology? Well, you'll be able to pass the classes and you'll get to be on the field. But what am I to do with a criminology degree if I don't know what criminology actually is and all of that jazz? So, like, what would be your biggest recommendation, like guys going into college, thinking about what they want to do moving forward?
Well, I mean, I've found the niche of baseball, so it's tough for me to get too far into it to know if there's interest outside of the game, how to approach that, because I've only kind of stayed within the game.
Yeah.
But from talking to other people and learning from other people as well, I do think it's easier once you figure out what you want to do, but I think you have to kind of start taking steps in the direction of any interest to really find out if that's what you want to do or not. And honestly, I also think that like when you start diving in face first and you do a bunch of research, you put a bunch of time and effort into something, like whether you liked it a little bit or not, once you put all that time and effort into it, now you really kind of start to be more invested in it anyways, right? So I think that's part of why, I wanted to stay in baseball so bad, is because I put so much time into it, and I've, done so much work to try to, be a baseball player, and have learned so much. And like I said, I feel like I've been around a lot of people that have helped me so much, and I've been so lucky that I felt like if I didn't stay with that knowledge and kind of expand that going into any other field wouldn't make sense, because of how much I've learned about the game. And it's half of what most people can learn too, in the major leagues and playing in the major leagues and playing throughout the minor leagues. And, I was lucky enough to be able to, learn from those people that have those experiences. And while I might not have them, I've helped players through them and understood kind of what they're going through a little bit. But no, I mean, I think that's in my opinion, the best way is to just dive into something that you feel like you might be interested in.
Yeah.
And
trial by fire.
Yeah. And it's not wasted. Even if you decide it's not something that you want to do down the line, it's not wasted, because you've put time and effort, and if you've done it the right way, where you're organized and this and that, like that can be used for something else in the future as well.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed with like so I'm a nerd when it comes to like book reading and stuff like that. So I'm actually reading a biography on Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm going to Italy
Nice.
for a wedding, so that's what got me hooked on it. I didn't want to go into Florence and then like be like, well, this is a cool old thing, I don't know what it is. And then like you come back and then you start realizing that was that thing. Oh my God, So that's why I'm reading the book. But what made him different from everybody else is that he wanted to be a polymath, which polymath means I want to be in a bunch of different subjects and try to learn as much as I possibly can. And it actually helped him in different areas of his expertise, which was obviously painting and drawing. But it's exactly what you're saying, is like try a bunch of things, and then you never know if like you can take something from this one subject or this one passion or this one thing that you did or experience, and then you can actually add it into your career.
For sure. No doubt. There's so many different, and I think you learn more about people too, right? Of like how to interact with people and what the best route, because that's basically, and I mean, that's every profession, right? Is how you interact with people, what people, how people respond to you, and what you can get them to do. We're in the profession, we're in an aspect of where we're trying to get players to make adjustments. We're trying to get them to do different things. And in order to do that, you have to be able to create a relationship where they feel like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Yep. Like, I'm going to try what he thinks. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes, like, it's phrased in a way, or it's a workaround to make them think that they thought of the idea, right? So, but that's, like I said, I think when you have experience in a bunch of different areas, you start to learn the different tricks of the trades. But I think what you said is probably the most important, more so than just trying everything else, is like reading books and learning about how to learn, one, but learning about how to interact with people, and all those different aspects is so key to just honestly, I think in any profession, it's gonna help. Yeah. Whether you're in baseball or not, when you learn like what people are actually thinking about and what they actually want to do, then you can really start to take steps forward in whatever you're doing.
How are you getting your skills better?
Reading. I like audiobooks a little bit better than reading itself, just because I can do it while I'm driving, which I drive a lot, or cleaning up or doing something else outside.
So you'll actually go down different rabbit holes, and then you can actually take that information and use it in your job. For
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the ones that was really influential to me was How to Win Friends and Influence People. I don't know if you've
that's a very good book.
That one.
Yeah,
like
very good
that
book.
That one to me was like it's an old one. It's been around a long time, and there's a reason, because all those principles are here to stay, because the technology is going to change and all that's going to change, but
people aren't going to change.
People, I mean, in general, they want they want to hear their name. They want to hear, they want it to be, you want it to be about you. It's great when you hear people say your name and when you
100%
are acknowledged for things. And that's always going to be important. And so knowing those little personal skills that, you think about, but then you don't really like know if other people think that about you. Right. Yeah. So it
makes you end up becoming like a clubhouse guy. Mm-hmm. And then it also helps you as a coach being able to relay like, hey, I'm a competent human being.
For sure. Me. And the communication is huge. And almost, I mean, I'm sure there's some jobs where, you don't need to communicate with other people, but most of them, you have to communicate with people, and you have to do it in a way that they want to communicate with you. And in general, when people want to communicate with you, they like you. If they like you, you're more likely to get their business or be more productive or whatever the case is.
Well, you're selling your ideas.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. I think that's like, people say, oh, I don't want to be in sales. Well, I mean,
everything's in sales.
I think you're in sales no matter what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to sell this player that my, plan for him is going to work.
100%.
Right? And that's what I have to do. And if I fail in doing that, then I'm probably not going to make him any better. If I don't make him any better, then he's probably not going to listen to me. He doesn't listen. He doesn't want me as a coach, right? And then, I don't have a job. And at some point, that's going to happen. That's just the nature of the business. But, I think you're always in sales, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah. One of my mentors when I first got out of school, we were sitting around a round table, and one of the guys that was there, he was like, I hate sales. And the mentor goes, you hate sales? He goes, yeah, I hate it with a passion. And like, you like dating people, right? And he goes, well, yeah, you're in sales. Like, you got to sell your ideas. You got to sell who you are. You got to be able to find that middle ground and be able to tell people like, hey, I have a lot to offer here.
Yeah. And it doesn't always have to be, the in your face, buy this, do that. There's ways around it, and that's where I think exploring different avenues of books and audio books and things like that, where you can get different ideas on how to approach things where, you might not like being out of the forefront or saying your ideas to people. But when you start to, explore some of these other avenues, you can find ways that work for you.
Well, even like a book's the greatest trade in the world, if you think about it. Yeah. You spend $30. If you go to a used bookstore, you spend $15, and you get all this knowledge from a single human being that experienced all these things and is telling you all the secrets.
Yep.
Which is unbelievable.
Yep.
So how do you convince a superstar to make the adjustment?
Then it's a challenge with every single one. I think the first part is just kind of making sure that the first impression or the way that you start talking to them is the right way. If they're a superstar, then they're going to be smart about who they listen to. They've probably had a lot of hitting coaches to get to that point, and they've learned what to listen to and what not to, what's BS and what's not, and they can filter out, what type of stuff that they don't want to listen to, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think first establishing that I'm not going to come in and try to change everything that you're doing. Like, obviously you've had a ton of success. Like, we want to keep that going. Mm-hmm. That's going to be the main principle of how I start to attack them. Mm-hmm. When they start asking questions is generally when I would step in of like, hey, like, I've been struggling with this. Like, what do you think? I would already have had that ready for that moment. You know what I mean? Where it's like I won't bring them something that I haven't used with another player and I've already had success with. Mm-hmm. Usually several times.
Yep.
But it's always to me, it's always like a balance of finding what works for that player at the moment that allowed them to have the success that they're having. Mm-hmm. And then, most of the time, if they're working on something, it's because they're struggling a little bit, mm-hmm. right? And if they're a superstar, they've had seasons, they've had, maybe multiple seasons where, they were one of the best hitters in the league or whatever the case is. So generally what I do is I'll just look and study those seasons and see, like, is there anything that they're doing now that's different mm-hmm. than what they were doing then? And generally there is, just based on the passage of time and adjustments and things like that.
And they're human, there's flaws.
For sure.
Yeah.
But if there's glaring differences, then we can talk about, hey, I noticed, in your two best seasons, like, you started more open or whatever the case is. I'm just throwing something random out, right? And then just talk about that with them of like, what made you switch to being more close? Oh, well, I was starting to get, pounded away, so I wanted to close off so I had a little bit more length to reach the outside pitch, whatever the case is. Okay, I can see how that's working, but what's happening now is you're getting busted in and you can't get to it because you're closed off a little bit, And maybe you have like a small hole down and away, but like most hitters can't hit down and away. It's mm-hmm. just not a very productive spot of the zone. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a balance to strike between making sure that you're providing some type of value, because if all I'm doing is just saying, oh yeah, great swing, oh good job, do this, do that, and not giving them anything of value, then I'm not going to try to push something that doesn't need to be pushed.
Yeah.
But in general, most hitters will have something that they're working on at all times, whether that's working on staying the same, mm-hmm. whether that's working on hitting the inside pitch or hitting sliders better or laying off sliders or, mm-hmm. Honing in your zone a little bit tighter. Every hitter, even in the major leagues, has something specific like that they're working on every year to help them be the best that they can be. And so, we just try to make sure that those goals line up with exactly what's going to work with that player. And with the higher profile star players that have already had success, like we're going to look to have way more input from them on what they think is the right direction for them to go.
A lot of coaches, no matter if they're like a dad or a high school coach or even guys that want to work with college guys, they feel like, well, I never had a playing career like this person. How can I give them advice if I was never that player? What would you say to that?
I think there's a certain extent to which you can play and learn the game and struggle and learn how to, learn what you struggled with and what made you, like what you had to work on and mm-hmm. what you had to change already and make adjustments. So a lot of times, guys that are really good haven't had to make many adjustments throughout their careers. They've always been really, really good. Now, there's a lot of players that have made adjustments, gotten better, and that's just kind of how they've gotten to where they're at. But there's a lot of guys that were already way better than the competition and had been their whole career. And then, like, at some point when they have to make the adjustment, now, like, they're kind of confused on how to handle it because they've never had to do that before, right? They've never had to think about the mechanics of their swing before because it's always been perfect.
Yep.
Well, at some point, it's going to break down a little bit, you know, and you have to find a way to get that back on track. Otherwise, you know, then you have a month slump instead of just a week, right? But I think that's part of the playing career is long enough, then you start to understand that. But also, if it's not long enough, then you don't understand that. It's just kind of a funny balance. But obviously, I didn't have a really strong playing career, but I studied a ton in terms of the swing and what needs to happen in the swing, what the best hitters all have in common. And as I started to learn that, I found a lot of trial and error through giving lessons, and that kind of helped build the base for me, I think, of understanding what works for certain hitters and what doesn't. And the crazy thing about hitting is that you could have two hitters that have the exact same issue or flaw. They both can't hit four-seamers or whatever the case is. They're both uphill in their swing path. It's too uphill. And I could give them both the exact same drill, and one of them it'd work perfect for, and the other one it wouldn't do anything, right? It could make them worse, right?
Well, even like the explanation of certain things that players do, like you can find clips of Pujols on MLB TV, and then you look at video and like that's not what he's doing. But then you'll find another guy that explains exactly like it is, and then it is exactly how it is. It's weird how the mind works and how it perceives what you're doing physically. And when I was younger, I don't know how you feel about this, but when I was younger, I always looked to find interviews of professionals talking about how they approach their swing. But looking back at it, I don't know if that was the right way of looking at it, because it seemed like the instructors knew more because they saw more players and they had more reps and they saw more swings and had more conversations with these people, and they could actually describe, oh, this is what's actually happening in the swing, and this is how your swing is operating. This is what you need to do.
For sure. I mean, the example that you said with Pujols was perfect, and we run into guys like that all the time. Vice versa, right? Guys that think about, he might at some point he would miss fastballs because he would get too underneath. So he's like, okay, I got to think chop down because that's what gets my barrel to stay, more in the zone, and I don't drop underneath the plane and miss. Where, it could be the opposite for other guys, which is, I think, what helped a lot of players who were taught more like what Pujols was saying, was just like chop down,
Well, I remember like in the 90s, like that was the thing that everyone talked about.
Yeah. And it works for players. Like it's not just don't teach him to swing down, because that's not what actually happens in the swing. And it's like, yeah, of course, but like also like teaching a guy to swing straight up, that's not what happens in the swing either. But
it's confirmation bias. That's what it is. Like you say, oh, this helped for this player, so it's going to help for this player, and then it just keeps on continuing. And the next thing you know, you run into a person, and you're like, oh, that didn't really help him out at all.
But you got to have the right tool for the toolbox. You can't just take a hammer when you need a screwdriver. And the hammer works when there's a nail there, but it's not going to work with the screw. So you got to pull a different tool, and that tool is, okay, for this guy, he's swinging too far down. We got him to swing. Got to get him to swing up more. And a lot of times it's easier.
What's that thing that?
Yeah, and a lot of times it's easier to kind of force it there with drills, right? Than like telling them exactly what to think about in their swing. Because if they're more internal with it, then there's more room for error, as opposed to having more of an external feel where it's just something that they're, okay, let me face this curveball that's really loopy. If I'm swinging down, like my timing window is really small, so I might not have very much success. I got to figure out a way to match the plane of that pitch a little bit easier, right? Or whether they're hitting heavy balls. So if they're swinging too far down, it's going to cut and they're just going to fly up in the air and not get, good force behind them. So yeah, I think that's a really, really huge point of, and I think that's what makes, going back to what you were saying earlier, I think that's what makes, a really good hitting coach from a major league to a minor league and professional to whatever you're doing. Like, you have to be able to find what's going to work for that player. And if all you're doing is teaching one specific way, then you're going to help some players for sure. But there's some players that you're just not going to get any better.
Yeah, it seems like drills kind of become stale at some point and they lose their effectiveness. It's kind of like caffeine, where like you keep on taking some caffeine. Next thing you know, you're caffeine out and you can't take anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like that's how drills are. And I've noticed that I've simplified it because I used to hit with a guy that was old school. He was the former coach of SALU back in the day. And he always threw BP to me during the off season. And I would ask for front toss. He's like, no, you don't want front toss. You're going to go straight into BP. And I was like, but I'm not even like close to being warmed up yet. He's like, no, just go straight to BP. And this old guy would get on the mound and just start just chucking it and just like throwing fastballs. And he's like, all right, I'm throwing curveballs. And I'm not even ready for it. Just starts throwing curveballs. It was the best off season I've ever had. And I think the reason was because it was just seeing overhand consistently all day long for an hour and being able to know like, oh, I can still make adjustments inside of overhand.
Yep.
How do you feel about that when you're thinking about players and seeing like, oh, there's too much front toss, there's too much tee, or there's too much machine? Like, how do you think about that from a training perspective?
I think that's the best way to do it, honestly, is to face as much arm, live, mixed as you possibly can. Because
Interesting.
Now, if there's something specific that you're working on in terms of like a big mechanical change that you need to make,
Yeah.
and you can't execute that during
Off of the
the
arm.
drill,
Yeah.
or during the BP session, then like maybe you need to strip it down a little bit to, okay, can I do this off of like a short overhand toss? So that's going to be a little bit better. Okay, I can't do that. Okay, let me try like a short, like an underhand flip, and see if that works. And then like if you really need to strip it down all the way to the tee and then build it from there, of like, okay, let's try it off of flips now. Okay, it's starting to take in a little bit better, and then you start to challenge it. Most of the time people go from the other way, where they start it with the tee,
Yeah.
and then they just go straight to BP, and then it doesn't transfer. It's like, well, yeah, you didn't really give it really a chance to. You kind of have to progress it from, if you really want to start with the tee, great. I don't think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to, if it's something that somebody really wants in their routine, they believe in, then they can do it. I mean, I'm just going to push them in other areas to try to improve their training. But
It's almost like you have to start with BP and then you can drill down from there.
yeah, that's definitely one way to go about it. I think that can work for sure.
Because like at the end of the day, it's, can I see the ball? And then can I time up the ball? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and there's another aspect of hitting, that you usually don't get in the cage, which is that competitive side, right? Normally in the cage, it's like, oh, I'm working on mechanics, like I'm working on my swing. It's like, well, there's another aspect of the game that is taking the at bat and learning how to take an at bat, right? And like understanding what the pitcher's trying to do and going through the different situations of what is the situation in the game calling for. There's a runner on second, nobody outs. It's first and third, one out. Like, what are we trying to do? What's the pitcher going to try to do because of that? And then kind of navigating through those at-bats, which is something I think that gets lost when all in the cage, all you're doing is just working on your swing. Or you're either working on your swing or you're facing something that's like really nasty, which is good. It's amazing. But if you're not also getting the training in how to approach those at-bats, I think you're missing a little bit of a piece of kind of being an overall hitter.
When you look at lower levels, can you see things a lot faster now?
For sure, yeah. I think so.
Like what do your eyes go to straight from?
Just in terms of the swing, or?
Well, no, just like in general, like when you go to, I mean, if you went to a high school baseball game or you went to a college game or even a minor league game, like where's your brain go first?
I mean, I always watch the hitters, but
and then like, what about the hitters?
I usually like looking at the swing, but generally I'll just kind of like I'm not like immediately in a scout like evaluation type mode.
but not
I'm
even
more
like
of
that.
like
Just like a fan
development
of the game.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm more of like a development. So I always look at the swing and I'm like, oh, I bet he could do this. Like I bet if he did this, like he could be better. And that is something that has never stopped from me. I try in every situation, and then people that I come in contact with is like, I want to learn what's worked and how that situation, because it could help me with another situation at some point, because there's so many different ways to do it. And if I just keep building like all these different situations, now I have like one more to pull from if I need it. You know what I mean? Of like, oh, I worked with this guy this one time and he was doing this, and I tried to get him to do that and it didn't work. Okay, so, but I tried and didn't do this and it worked. And then it worked for this guy, and then it worked for that guy, and it worked for this guy. And you know what? I didn't think it was going to work for this guy, but it did, you know, even though it was a drill that I wouldn't think would, or whatever the case is. So I think that's kind of how I started to take a little bit of a next step, I think, is just trying to build as many data points on that aspect of what drills can work for certain situations, and then you start to understand kind of how the swing works a little bit better.
because I think that's where coaches can get better. Is like, that's why I like asking that question to a lot of coaches. Is like, what's the first thing that you think about when you go into a game? Because I'm probably thinking totally different. Because like how you described it, I'm actually thinking probabilities. I go straight to, okay, this pitcher threw this, he's going to throw this, and sure enough, like it ends up becoming that pitch because I've just done the reps over and over and over again. You can start seeing the game a lot better that way. And like each guy has their own thing. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm always looking at the swing, always. And if it's a major league game and if it's guys that I've advanced, you know, that we faced before, that I know what their pitches are and how that works, then, you know, I'm probably thinking more along those lines as well, of like, oh, he's going to be, or based on the last pitch, right? Like, oh, he just fouled off a fastball to the pull side. Like, what's coming next? Like, most likely not. Or, oh, that was a dumb pitch. Like, he was late on the fastball, and then you threw him a breaking ball, like, and you smashed it. It's like, yeah, well, he was on time for that. You could tell, right, or whatever the case is. So,
last question, because I know you got to go back to your war games. What does success look like for a player? And then what does success look like for a coach from your perspective?
Well, I think there's many different definitions of success. And one of the goals as a coach is to try to get players to have a little bit better definition of success, where it's not going 4 for 4, you know, every day isn't the goal, because that's just not attainable.
It's literally impossible. When you have a 4-4 day, it feels like you're on, like you can do anything.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, can you take that fourth at bat when you're 0 for 3 the same as you would if you were 3 for 3? You know what I mean? Yeah. Can you do that? And not a lot of players can. But I think that's where, like, you will see a totally different at bat if you're 3 for 3 than if you're 0 for 3. You know, you're 0 for 3, you're like, oh, I got to get a hit. You know, I don't want to have it. You know, if you're 3 for 3, you're like, here we go. You know, add one more. You know? And that's such a big part of the game. But to me, that's part of an evaluation of success, is like, we're not evaluating ourselves whether we got a hit or not. You know, we're taking it more through the process of, you know, am I swinging at the right pitch? You know, am I on time? Am I in rhythm? Is this a pitch that was it a pitch that I was looking for, and did I take a good swing? Did I hit the ball hard? Did I square the ball up? You know, or are we checking those boxes first before it's like, you know, I'm 0 for 3. Well, yeah, you hit 3 rockets. Like, what can you do? You can't control where the ball goes that much.
You can also think about it as like you're setting up pitchers too for a next to bat. Like,
for sure.
Like there's so many guys in the major league, you can just tell they set up pitchers for later on down the road when it really counts.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen guys do that like mid at bat. It's like, I feel like Anthony Santander is the guy who's, you know, he studies so much, and I feel like sometimes he just sets the pitcher up with, like, pretends that he's really, really late for a pitch, and maybe he was, and then all of a sudden he's on time for
just
the next
unloads
pitch,
on it.
and it's like, well, he set him up for that or something.
Yeah. Well, even like when the playoffs start happening, and you're like, this guy was 0 for 5 against him in the season, and then next thing you know, he hits a home run. Like, how is that possible? Like, the guy was 0 for 5. Like, of course he's gonna get a hit, but he just crushed this ball. Like, in the highest pressure situation, like there has to be a setup here.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
success for a coach.
Success for a coach is way more difficult to evaluate because you don't have the numbers. And I think this is something that throughout the industry has been a challenge for whether it's front office or whether it's other coaches to get better. Because that's, if you're wanting to be the best, whether it's a player or a coach, like you need evaluation to figure out what ways you need to get better. And it's easy for the players. It's easy. All their numbers are on this website, and it says, oh, boom, you stink at hitting sliders, right? Yeah. Okay, we got to get better at hitting sliders. There's nothing like that for coaches. We have to rely on either, looking within ourselves, which is very challenging, right? Or talking to other people about, hey, what can I do to get better? And you have to have a lot of trust that they're going to tell you the truth, right? And tell you something you probably don't want to hear. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a really challenging dynamic, and we try to put things in place so that the coaches can feel comfortable and confident and like allow themselves to realize you're not going to be great at everything. There's always going to be something that you're struggling with. But if you want to be a major league coach, if you want to be the best coach you can be, whatever the case is, whatever you want to do, whether it's a major league coach or whatever, you have to look at what am I struggling with and what can I do to be better with that? Whether that is, I'm not communicating that well with the guys, or I'm coming on too strong with players, or I'm coming on too weak. I'm not pushing them hard enough in certain scenarios to increase their training. Or whether that's just learning. Understanding of the swing, needs to be a little bit more improved, or the verbiage, or learning Spanish, or all those different, there's so many aspects of it. And like I said, it's hard to evaluate those aspects that strongly because you have to rely on other people for the most part to tell you that, because there's nowhere you can look that gives you that info. But in general, I think success as a coach is just helping those players reach their goals. But that comes in many different shapes and sizes in terms of the players' goals. But
especially when you talk about different ethnicities and all of that, it becomes a lot more challenging at the tip top of the mountain.
For sure. But it's a challenging job because success is it doesn't happen all that much, right? 3 out of 10 times is amazing.
Yeah.
So you have to evaluate success a little bit differently. And to me, it's having the right process. Mm-hmm. If you have the right process and you're doing things backed by analytics, backed by data, but also backed by tradition and what's worked.
Yeah.
And that's part of data too, right? It might not be specific as numbers, but if you're approaching it the right way, then there's only so much you can do. But I always feel like I'm accountable for everything that happens. He just won't listen. It's okay, well, what do I need to do better so that he does listen, right? Or he just doesn't get it. I've told him a million times. Okay, well, what can I change about my approach that allows him to understand it? And so, it's so easy, and everyone does it, right? It's just natural. He just doesn't get it. He just doesn't understand, and it's so easy to just blame the player on. That's why he's not having success, instead of looking more to yourself, okay, well, what can I do better to help him understand, or help him learn, or help him execute in those situations?
Well, I never thought about it. You're dealing with so many different cultures and backgrounds and ethnicities and family backgrounds, friends. It's a totally different beast when you're talking about coaching these guys to perform at the highest level.
Yeah. I mean, they all have their own team for the most part. Whether that's their family, whether that's, like you were saying, their friends, or whether it's, their hitting coach that they have in the off season, whether it's their strength coach that they have in the off season that they use for programming, and their trainer and their physical therapist and their massage therapist. They have all these people as part of their team to make sure that they're getting everything that they need. And my goal is to be a part of that team.
Yeah.
Even if they already have a hitting coach, sometimes it's actually better if they already have a hitting coach, because I'm not able to learn everything. I can look at the numbers and see what the numbers say, but that doesn't tell me what he was working on 3 years ago that allowed him to have success, right? And this guy might be able to help me with that, right? Or if I'm trying a drill that I think might help him, or I'm going to try a drill that might help him, and he's like, oh, he tried that 2 years ago and hated it. And if I bring that drill to him, he might be like, well, this drill, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? So getting context and all those things is important.
It's the ultimate coaching game. That's what it feels like. It feels like it's the ultimate coaching game in trying to navigate those waters. Matt, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Guys, we'll catch you in the next episode.